Let's combat and fight back with maltracks. The war of the minds, they want control of the masses. And Common Core, they dumb us down in the classes. Without knowledge, we can't gain access. Build with the elders, take notes and write classics. We keep whining on the block, how it's gonna stop? Let's start supporting our own, make their supply drop. We buy stocks, then we buy blocks. Cause we know the truth and we tuned in to Dr. Maat.
Peace and love. Welcome to another Truth to Power Talk with your sister, Dr. Maat. Thank you for joining another powerful discussion. And tonight, I have with me another powerful guest, Dr. William Darity. How are you, Dr. William Darity?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on, Dr. Maat.
Thank you so much, Doc, for coming on. I purchased your new book, From Here to Equality, Reparations for Black Americans in the 21st Century. And so when I perused the book, I said, I have to reach out to Dr. Darity and ask him to come on the platform. And so you agreed. And you also said that you would want your co-author, Dr. Kirsten Mullen, to also come on the platform to talk about the book. And so I look forward to reaching out to her and bringing her on the platform as well to talk about this wonderful book that is now available. And family, look, tonight I am going to be giving away 10 copies of Dr. Darity's book. All right. From Here to Equality, Reparations for Black Americans in the 21st Century. But you know, my name is Dr. Maat, and you know, Maat means balance and harmony, righteousness, but it also means reciprocity. So I'm not just going to give you the book, you know, for nothing. You have to do something to earn this book. And to win the book tonight, the first thing I would like for you to do, family, is subscribe to my channel. So if you're watching this broadcast on Facebook, okay, head on over to YouTube, type in Dr. Oya Maat, and be sure to subscribe to my channel. Not only subscribe to my channel, but click the notification bell so that as soon as I go live, you will be notified. Also, family, thumb up this video. Then share this video on your social media pages and be sure to tag Dr. Maat. Also, head on over to Facebook, like my Facebook page, Dr. Maat. And when you have completed all of these things, I want you to type done in the comments section. Okay. And so that's what you have to do in order to win this book. All right. And again, I'm giving out 10 copies. And as the conversation is going on, I will be looking in the chat and I will be looking on Facebook and on YouTube and seeing who's tagging me in what, who shared what. And I'm also going to be seeing if my subscribers have gone up and my likes have gone up, Doc. All right, family. All right. So I'm going to read Dr. Darity's bio. All right. So bear with me for a second, family. Bear with me. We're going to get to it. Okay. Let me pull it up. All right. So Dr. William A. Sandy Darity is the Samuel Du Bois Cook Professor of Public Policy, African and African American Studies and Economics, and the director of the Samuel Du Bois Cook Center on Social Equity at Duke University. He has served as chair of the Department of African and African American Studies and was the founding director of the Research Network on Racial and Ethnic Inequality at Duke. Darity's research focuses on inequality by race, class, and ethnicity, stratification economics, schooling, and the racial achievement gap, North-South theories of trade and development, skin shade, and labor market outcomes, the economics of reparations, the Atlantic slave trade, and the Industrial Revolution, the history of economics, and the social psychological effects of exposure to unemployment. His most recent book, co-authored with A. Kirsten Mullen, is From Here to Equality, Reparations for Black Americans in the 21st Century. So Doc, again, thank you so much, Doc, for coming on the platform. I do appreciate, your presence, your wisdom, and just all of the work and research that you've done, Dr. Darity. So thank you again so much for being with us tonight.
Well, thanks for having me.
All right, Doc.
Really,
so your
really
book
pleased to be on your program.
Oh, yes, Doc. I'm telling you. And I was excited that you came. I'm telling you. So, Doc, I want to first ask you, and I know that you talk about this in your book. And family, look, I see you in the chat. I do see you. I do want to acknowledge all of you here. I do see you. Please, family, let's get the word out. Share this video, family. Let's get the word out. Dr. Darity is going to be dropping a lot of jewels tonight. And look, I'm looking in the chat already, Doc, and I see about 3 or 4 dones. All right. So this might be 3 or 4 people who have already won Dr. Darity's new book, From Here to Equality, Reparations for Black Americans in the 21st Century. All right. So, Doc, reparations. We hear that word reparations. And if you look up the definition, a quick Google search for the definition of reparation, it means to make amends, right? Amends for injury and wrongdoing, right? So Doc, I don't want to, and as I've explained when we were offline, I don't want to assume that everyone is familiar, right, with the history. I don't. Some people, we know, I call it the miseducation. We've been miseducated. So I don't want to assume that all of us know, the same history. So Doc, can you walk us through what were the injuries and wrongdoings that happened to Black Americans that call for repair, that call for reparations? Can you describe that history, Doc, in detail?
Well, I'd like to start with the notion of amends that you talked about and how that connects with the definition of reparations that we use in From Here to Equality. We define reparations as a program of acknowledgement, redress, and closure for a grievous injustice or for a set of grievous injustices. And so I think the amends dimension that you talked about is associated with acknowledgement and redress, where from our perspective, acknowledgement means that the culpable party, the party that has committed the atrocities, acknowledges or admits that they have done so. And they also indicate that they recognize that they have benefited or somebody else has benefited from the harm. And finally, they say at the stage of acknowledgement that they will engage in an act of restitution. And so that leads us to the second component of reparations, which is redress, which is the restitution that normally has taken the form of a monetary payment to the victimized community. And this includes examples like the German payments that were made to victims of the Holocaust. It includes the payments that the United States government made to Japanese Americans after their unjust incarceration during the course of World War II. And there are other examples. One in point is the payments that were made to families that lost loved ones during the course of the 9/11 terrorist attacks. And these are families who suffered significant losses, personal losses, despite the fact that it wasn't actually the United States government that was the culpable party, but a decision was made by Congress that restitution should be made to those families. So the acknowledgement and the redress components constitute the acts of making amends. Now, we have a third dimension of our definition of reparations, which is what we refer to as closure, which is a recognition on the part of the culpable party and the victimized community, or an agreement that they reach that the debt has been paid or that the bill has been met. And that the victimized community won't make any further claims on the culpable party unless there's a renewal of the atrocities or there's a new set or type of atrocities that takes place. But otherwise, the account is settled. So what is it that we have to take into account for the purposes of establishing Black reparations in the United States? Well, we argue in the book that there are 3 phases of atrocities that have to be considered. And I think one of the points that I'd like to make at the outset is I have real reservations when people use the phrase slavery reparations, because the implication is that the only atrocity that's relevant to the case for Black reparations is the horror that was associated with slavery. But that's not the case in the U.S. context. So the first phase of atrocities is, of course, associated with slavery, but that's the crucible that creates the conditions for ongoing white supremacy in the United States, which is something that has beset the lives of Black Americans for years and decades on end. So the second phase of atrocities that succeeds the period of enslavement is nearly a century of legal segregation in the United States, what we colloquially refer to as the Jim Crow period. But I think it's important to also recognize that it's during that period of time that there was a wave of white massacres that took place, starting with the end of the Civil War, carrying through at least into the 1940s. And these massacres were typically directed at communities of Black people where some degree or measure of prosperity had been established. So what these massacres did was wipe out Black lives, they wiped out Black property, or in many instances, the white terrorists actually took over the Black property and made it their own. And so when Black Americans did try to achieve some measure of economic success, it was frequently taken away from them. And then the third phase is the period after the passage of the Civil Rights Acts, in which legal apartheid no longer was operative in the United States. Now, there are lots of forms of segregation that have persisted, but they have not necessarily been segregation that was approved or sanctioned under the law. But the types of atrocities that have gone on in the aftermath of the passage of the Civil Rights Acts include mass incarceration, anti-Black police violence, including the execution of unarmed Blacks by the police, discrimination in employment, credit, and housing markets. And then what's really significant from the standpoint of the case that we make in From Here to Equality, the enormous racial wealth differential that persists in the United States. And let me talk a bit about what the numbers look like with respect to that wealth differential.
Please do, Doctor.
I also want to emphasize that I'm talking about wealth, the difference between what people own and what they owe, the net value of their property. I'm not talking about their income, which is primarily determined by their earnings. But the wealth differential in the United States by race is extremely, extremely high. The most recent data that we have from the 2019 Survey of Consumer Finances, which is taken by the Federal Reserve, survey that's administered by the Federal Reserve, indicates that the average Black household has a net worth that is $850,000 less than the average net worth of a white household in the United States. And this corresponds to a situation in which Black Americans are approximately 13% of the nation's population, but possess only 2.5% of the nation's wealth. And so one of the things that we argue that's central to a reparations program that would be applicable to Black America would be a program that would bring the Black share of wealth at least into proportion with the Black share of the nation's population. And we estimate in the pages of From Here to Equality that this would require an expenditure of at least $10 to $12 trillion. And so that constitutes the baseline for our estimate of what the cost of a reparations program would amount to.
Okay, Doc. So you said we're looking at about, you said 11 to 12 trillion. I want to make sure I heard you correct, Doc.
Yeah, I said 10 to 12 trillion.
10 to 12 trillion.
We can talk about 11 trillion. but that's the baseline.
Just a
Uh,
baseline.
that's the baseline. There could be justifications that people could offer for making it higher. I don't think that there's any justification for making it lower.
Absolutely. I mean, absolutely. And so thank you for that, Doc. And I'm glad that you mentioned when you were talking that there were multiple massacres, because typically when people think of the massacre, they think of Tulsa. And I tell folks all the time, we had other Black Wall Streets. It wasn't just Tulsa. There were other massacres that took place. I believe there's a documentary on YouTube called Wilmington on Fire.
Right.
And so you had that. So it was a number of massacres that took place. So I'm glad that you said that, and then you walked us through the period of time.
The year 1919 was especially horrific. And I think as a
Red
consequence
Summer.
of the number, yeah, that's what they call it, the Red Summer of
Yeah.
1919, because it was so bloody. Um,
Mm.
but there were upwards of about 30 massacres that took place in that year alone. And they took place north and south, east and west. So they spanned Chicago, Illinois. They included Washington, D.C. They included Omaha, Nebraska. And in 1920, the small town of Elaine, Arkansas, was the site of a horrible massacre that was documented by the journalist Ida B. Wells. But in 1919 alone, there were about 30 of these that took place across the United States. And the one in which the most explicit records we have of whites taking over Black property is the instance that took place in Ocoee, Florida. Now, and I'll just say Florida is was one of the bloodiest states in the United States with respect to these kinds of white uprisings and terrorist attacks.
Mm. And Doc, just let me ask you this: how did you all come up with the figure 10 to 12 trillion as a baseline? I'm just curious, Doc.
So it's pretty straightforward. We were trying to figure out what sum of money would be required to move the Black share of wealth from 2.5% to at least 13%, so that it would be consistent with the Black share in the nation's population. So that's how we came up with the estimate. And there's a little bit fuzziness because there are different estimates about what the total amount of wealth is in the United States, frequently ranging from about $100 billion to somewhere in the vicinity of $120 billion. And so that's why we have this interval of 10 to 12 trillion dollars that we talk about.
Okay. Thank you so much, Doc, for answering that. Doc, your book, okay, it says From Here to Equality, Reparations for Black Americans in the 21st Century. So when I looked at this, I was drawn to two words: equality and reparations. So equality and reparations. So could you describe the relationship between these two? What's the relationship between that, equality and reparations?
So there are two senses in which we are concerned about the notion of equality in the context of reparations. The first of these is the idea that we want the Black share of wealth in the United States to be consistent with the Black share in the population. And that, we think, would produce a condition of what we would refer to as equal wealth between whites and Blacks in the United States. So that's the first sense, that we're trying to equalize the levels of wealth that are held by Black and white Americans. So in the same vein, it would involve raising Black net worth on average by $850,000, so that we could eliminate the gap that exists between Blacks and whites in terms of average net worth. So that's the first sense in which equality is supposed to be achieved. But the second sense is something that I think is a little more subtle, which is in the plan that we advance, we favor making essentially equal payments to all eligible recipients of the reparations fund. So that's another sense in which equality is relevant, because if you were to make equal payments of the amount of funds that would be required to bring about equality in household wealth between blacks and whites, if you gave all black recipients an equivalent amount, you would have a high degree of equality in wealth within the black community. In fact, we estimate at one point, and this is not in the book, but it's in an article or report that we did for the Roosevelt Institute. We estimated that if you were trying to calculate the ratio of the median level of wealth, which is the middle household, to the mean level of wealth, which is what we customarily think about as the average, for the black community, if we looked at that ratio before we had a reparations project of the type that we're talking about, that would be about 13%. And that's a very wide disparity. That suggests that there's a very unequal distribution of wealth among Black Americans. But if you were to give every individual Black American the equivalent of, say, $250,000 to $300,000, which would be required to bring about equal household wealth, that ratio of median to mean wealth within the Black community would rise to 87%. And that would be unprecedented in terms of thinking about equality among Black people themselves. There's never been a condition like that for any social group in the United States. But if we were in that kind of setting, then it would be far more likely that we could engage in collaborative and cooperative efforts to improve the social conditions of the entire Black community. We would also have leverage to act politically in a way in which we have not been able to act before. I mean,
hold on, I gotta give it up. I gotta give it up. You just dropped a heavy, just boom. I gotta give it up to you, Doc. I don't know if you can hear my little sound effect.
So you must tell me what was so heavy there.
Doc, let me tell you, because you were saying how, and I don't, I'm not going to quote you verbatim, but in a sense, you're saying, well, once we get equality, right, and we have, the wealth, we have the economics, you said then we can really participate the way we would want to politically. Yes. Because you see right now, people are kind of moving in the opposite. Like they want to affect policy without getting our economics together, and so essentially it seems like what you were just articulating is that, okay, once we have equality, once we have the wealth, then we could participate politically as we would like to. And it seems like that's what you were saying, Doctor.
That's been really apparent, and it's particularly apparent in the most recent election, is out of necessity, in the sense that the Republican Party is so overtly racist. Black Americans have typically given their electoral support to the Democratic Party, but there really has not been any payoff from that in terms of the provision of a substantive agenda to meet the needs of our community. And so I think that if our wealth position was changed, then we'd be in a position to exercise the kind of leverage to get a return for our political support that we have never really received.
And we've never received it, Doc. And I'm so glad that you said that. It seems like we don't understand, as Dr. Claude Anderson would say, that voting is a transaction. He calls it quid pro quo. So he says, you give your vote, or you cast your vote, for a candidate, but you're supposed to get something in return. And so, Doc, and I'm not going to turn this into a political discussion, but, folks were just celebrating the election of Biden and Kamala and everything. And Black folks are dancing in the street. And they're like, we won. And I'm thinking, what did we win? What did we get? What, I know that they came up with this Lift Every Voice Act or something like that. So folks, they using that to defend why they voted for Biden in his camp. But, these people, they're not, So anyway, Dr. Darity,
I was interviewed about that plan by the Wall Street Journal, and my comment was, yes, it lifts every voice. It doesn't lift Black voices. It's not a program or a plan that is specific to the needs of Black Americans. It's a universal plan, and there are some very nice things about it, but it's not a plan that would really alter the economic and political conditions of the Black American community. And so, yeah, it truly does lift every voice. It doesn't lift Black voices
specifically. And Kamala said that, Doc, in the interview. She was like, oh no, I'm not doing anything specifically for Black people. She made that clear.
Yeah. She's very straightforward.
Yeah, she was very straightforward. And so I was just wondering, I was perplexed, Doc, like, okay, well, she's telling you that she's not going to do anything specifically for you. Why do you think, that she deserves your vote? Oh, because I want to get Trump out of office. We need to get Trump out of office. We got to get him out of office, And so I said, okay, so you get Trump out of office, then what? What's the plan? What's the then what? Okay, we get him out of office. He's out of office. Then what? What's the then what? What do we get, in return? And so anyway, Doc, and family, I do see your questions in the chat. I'll definitely make sure that I ask Dr. Darity your questions. Okay, I'll definitely make sure towards the end that we open it up a little bit for questions. All right, but family, we're talking about From Here to Equality, Reparations for Black Americans in the 21st Century, which is Dr. Darity's new book. I'm going to be handing out 10 copies of his book tonight, but you have to do some things, family, in order to win this book. You have to first you have to subscribe to my channel. Okay. Subscribe to my channel, hit the notification bell. Okay. The second thing you have to do is thumb up Dr. Darity's video. Thumb up this video right now, family. Thumb up this video. Okay. And then share this video on your social media pages. But when you share this video on your social media pages, be sure to tag me, family. Okay. My African alias is Dr. Maat, but my given name is Dr. Deanna Bailey, right? So tag one a name. I have Facebook pages under each name. Okay. So be sure to tag me. All right. Tag me on Facebook. Also, family, like my page, Dr. Maat. Like my Facebook page, Dr. Maat. And when you've completed all of this, type done in the comment section. Type done in the comment section. And I see so far that I have 7 dones. And so while Dr. Darity is talking, I'm going to make sure, guys, that you do what you said you did, and that's follow the instructions. All right. So, Doc, and you kind of already touched on this next question. Although no amount of money, land or new programs, etc., will repair all that was destroyed as a result of the Ma'afa. However, if reparations were given, my question was, well, what should we desire? And you already kind of touched on that. You said, well, the baseline should be, $10 to $12 million. And you were speaking in terms of cash payment. Trillion dollars. And I believe, Doctor, you were speaking about cash payment, right? Okay. And so people in the chat room were saying, resources and land. So they were saying, well, look, in addition to cash, we need land. We need, programs, land, and et cetera. So what are your thoughts on that, Dr. Darity? Do you think we should just be focusing solely on getting cash payments, or do you think we need to be looking for, land? Because we know about the land grabs and how, a lot of us lost, a lot of our, ancestors lost, land, and then they found, oil on the land and became billionaires and all kinds of stuff. But do you think we should also seek, land and other resources, Dr. Darity?
So the denial of land, like the denial through the 20th century of access to resources for home ownership that was provided to whites, that's what leads to this enormous wealth differential. And so that's what we think should be the focus of a reparations project, is to eliminate that racial wealth differential. The racial wealth differential does indeed begin with the question of land in the 19th century, because from our perspective, the first phase of creating this wealth differential through American public policy was the failure to provide the formerly enslaved with the 40-acre land grants that they were promised as restitution for their years of bondage. And at the same time that they get denied access to the 40-acre land grants, under the terms of the Homestead Act of 1862, the federal government begins to provide 160-acre land allotments to white Americans in the western part of the United States, land that was under the possession of the indigenous Americans, and that was taken from them and was reallocated to white Americans. I think the best estimates that I've seen indicate that about 1.5 million white families in the United States benefited directly from this land allocation, and that today about 45 million living white Americans are the beneficiaries of those land allocations. So that's the beginning of the racial wealth gap. It is over the question of land. The denial of land to Black Americans and the provision of substantial tracts of land to white Americans. But in the 20th century, there really has been a shift towards a focus for the average or middle Black household and white household on possessing wealth in the form of home ownership. And there were a host of public policies that promoted white home ownership to the detriment of Black home ownership. This includes restrictive covenants, it includes redlining, it includes the discriminatory ways in which the GI Bill and the New Deal legislation was activated. And so if we're thinking about at least the first half of the 20th century, the capacity to increase wealth by home building rather than land acquisition per se was also distorted in such a way that it was unevenly applied between Blacks and whites. Then in the latter part of the 20th century, the focus has largely been on building wealth through the acquisition of financial assets, stocks, bonds, and the like. Now, our viewpoint is that we should give individuals who are eligible to receive reparations the funds and let them choose what to do with it. For those who want to purchase land, fine, they could do that. For those who want to purchase stocks and bonds, they could do that. For those who want to purchase a home, they could do that. Or for those who want to start a business or expand an existing business, then they could do that. And in fact, if we think about the business opportunities, the world becomes a very different one if Black folks have an initial amount of wealth that would permit them to make their business operations more secure and stable than the existing businesses in the Black community, where in the midst of the pandemic, it looks like we've lost at least 30% of them already.
Good gracious, Doc. Okay. All right, Doc. So my next question is this, and I was checking, Doc. Okay. So how should we go about getting reparations, Dr. Darity? And earlier offline, you and I talked about HR 40, which was proposed by Conyers in 1989. We talked about that briefly, and I know that there was a hearing last year with Sheila Jackson, and they had this hearing. Ta-Nehisi Coates and others were on the they served as witnesses. But Doc, how should we go about getting it? Because a lot of us, I'm gonna be honest, Dr. Darity, a lot of us are like kind of giving up. We're like, we don't think they're gonna do it. I know we've been fighting for it and we want it, but we're like, will we get it? I mean, we've been talking about it. Will we see it in our lifetime? Will we see it in the next generation? So how should we go about getting it? Because the Native Americans, they've received some form of reparations. The Jews, even though the Jewish Holocaust didn't happen on this soil, they still received some sort of reparations. And it wasn't even the American government who committed the atrocities, and they were given, reparations.
Most of the funds came from the German government, but the U.S. government does provide funds to American citizens who were victims of the Holocaust, or their heirs. years. Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely, Doc. So how do we go about Doc getting reparations? Do we wait for HR 40 and Sheila Jackson, and how do we go about it, Doc, as a collective?
Well, so there's a sense in which we've been waiting 155 years, right? Since the end of the Civil War, since our ancestors were denied the 40-acre land grants. So I guess I would ask people to be willing to continue to settle in for the long game. I'm not sure that this is something that's going to happen very quickly. I remember that when I first came to this topic, and it was about 30 years ago, it was around the same time that Representative Conyers introduced HR 40. In 1989, I was a reparations skeptic. And I was asked to write the introduction for a book that was subsequently called The Wealth of Races, which was a collection of essays that a collection of essays where economists were attempting to measure how big the reparations bill ought to be, an African American reparations bill. And the person who asked me to do this is a gentleman named Richard Franklin American. Yeah, it's an unusual name. His last name is American. But I told him at the time, well, I think this is something that will never happen. So why should we waste our time putting together a volume like this? And he said, I want you to write the introduction. You can say whatever you want to say. If you want to say that this is an insane or absurd idea, you're welcome to say that, but I want you to write the introduction. And I guess he knew that the content of the essays would have an effect on me. He must have anticipated that, because they did. The more I read, the more I became convinced that if we were truly going to address racial economic inequality in the United States, we would have to do something along the lines of a reparations plan. And so it was at that point that I said, even if the odds are extremely long that this is something that's going to happen, it's so much the right thing that needs to be done that I'm going to commit myself to being an advocate and doing serious research on the topic. And so that's how I came into the reparations project, with an awareness that it might not actually happen. And so I would ask the younger folks today in our community to recognize that this is something that we have to fight for, even if we don't actually see it occur in our own lifetimes. Because our ancestors never received the 40 acres, but that doesn't mean that they didn't deserve to receive it. And it doesn't mean that there were no adverse effects for subsequent generations of the failure to receive it. All it means from my perspective is the bill just keeps getting larger the longer the United States waits to meet it. And so we have to engage in a struggle to make this happen. And we have to make sure that our community is unified in supporting the reparations plan. So I think it's estimated that there's about 30% of Black Americans who actually oppose reparations. And I think that that's something that we have to address to move forward with a unified movement to make sure that this is something that happens. Now, will it happen through the adoption of HR 40? I have some strong reservations about the actual text of HR 40 or the content of the legislation. And I think people have not given it the kind of detailed attention that it requires. But the general idea of the formation of a commission to make the case for reparations and to provide proposals that should go to Congress for legislative purposes, that's a good idea. I don't think that we're going to get the right kind of report that needs to go to Congress out of a commission that's established on the basis of HR 40. So we have to re-examine HR 40 in a very, very serious and comprehensive way. But I think that the basic idea of forming a commission as a prelude to a reparations project is a good one. It's precisely what the Japanese American effort was rooted on. They had a commission, the Commission on Wartime Relocation and Internment of Civilians, that provided a report to Congress that was the basis for making the case for their reparations claim, but also included proposals for restitution.
Restitution. Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that, Dr. Darity. I do want to acknowledge brother Kofi Paisai, Kofi Paisai TV. He's in the building. Thank you so much, brother Kofi Paisai, for joining us. Also, want to shout out to Geechee Ya. I see you, Geechee Ya, in the chat. Thank you so much for joining us. I see brother Jeremiah Africa in the chat. New Black World Order. The Queen Mother Althea. I see you. I see a lot of you in the chat. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I see my French-speaking brothers and sisters all the way from France, in the chat room tonight. Thank you so much for joining. Again, family, tonight we are discussing From Here to Equality, Reparations for Black Americans in the 21st Century. All right, and tonight I will be giving out 10 copies. I think I'm down to 5 copies at this point because I have 5 winners. Brother Geechee Ya, I have a book for you. Brother Kwame Apaya, I have a book for you. Brother Tawolo Johnson, I have a book for you. And I have 2 more people here. Shadi Wap, that's what your name is on Facebook. Shadi Wap, I have a book for you. And Mr. Curtis Chambers, I have a book for you. If you did share the video and didn't tag me, I didn't see it. Okay, guys. So be sure to tag this video. Matter of fact, let me pull up the instructions again. Okay, in order for you to win a book, you have to first subscribe to my channel. And so if you're watching this broadcast on Facebook, head on over to YouTube, type in Dr. Maat, subscribe to my channel and hit the notification bell. After you do that, thumb up Dr. Darity's video. Thumb it up. Thumb up his video. Then share Dr. Darity's video on your social media platforms. And when you do share this video, you can tag Dr. Maat, or you can tag, matter of fact, let me throw this on the screen so you can see it. You can tag Dr. Maat or Dr. Deanna Bailey. Okay? Either one. Let me put it on the screen so you can see it because some people might not have caught it. Okay? And then
there's somebody in your chat who's named who's Queen Mother.
Oh, Althea. No, her name is we call her Queen Mother Althea. Yes,
well,
yes,
I just want to say that one of the greatest advocates of reparations was Queen Mother Audley Moore, who was one of the most powerful proponents of reparations for Black American descendants of U.S. slavery.
Oh man, I have to look her up, Doc. I never heard of her. Do you talk about her in your? I know.
We talk about her briefly in the book. I think if we'd had space, we should have said a lot more about her. She's a very, very important and significant person.
Beautiful, beautiful, Doc. Beautiful. All right. So yeah, her name is. We call her Queen Mother Althea. All right, and the last step, once you tag me, okay, like my Facebook page, Dr. Maat. Okay, like that Facebook page. And when you've completed all of this, type done in the comments section. All right, so Doc, my last question to you before I open the floor up, because I do see that people are asking questions in the chat, and I know I only have you for another 13 minutes, okay? So I want to be sure to get to their questions. So my last question is this, Dr. Darity. Can the Black community heal and advance without reparations? I've heard people say, look, we shouldn't be focused on reparations. Let's start practicing group economics, group politics, and try to heal and advance that way. Because people are saying, well, I don't know whether they're going to give it to us. I think it's uncertain. And so I don't want to put my energy there. I'd rather put it into practicing group economics and group politics and heal and advance that way. Can we heal and advance as a collective, Dr. Darity, without reparations?
Well, I think to the extent that we haven't received reparations, we have to do the best we can. But can you imagine how group economics might operate if the average Black household had $850,000 more in wealth. I think people don't really visualize how different our opportunity and our economic security would be if we had those resources that we merit. I mean, there's a justification for why we should have those resources. And if we are concerned about equality, that is, making our condition at least the equivalent of the condition of white Americans, that's a consequence of the exploitation of our ancestors' labor, as well as the exploitation of our own labor in the present moment. If we are concerned about doing that, we cannot create that degree of equality with existing resources in our possession. That's just an impossibility. It will not happen. So we have to alter the resource base in the Black American community to a level that would give us the capacity to act in the ways in which we deserve to be able to act. So I just would encourage people to think about, if they're interested in having group economics, to imagine how group economics might operate if the average Black household had an additional $850,000 in net worth.
Okay. All right. So Doc, so to answer your question, to answer my question, do you think that, and you're right, it would, if we could operate like that, that would be great. But can we, I do hear you saying that, yes, we need to focus on reparations, but do you think it's possible? And I don't know, maybe I missed your response because of what I was doing, but do you think it's possible to heal in advance without it? Like you said, with it, it would be great. It would be marvelous.
Well, I think it's contingent on what we mean by healing. And from the perspective of our book, we're very focused on this notion that to repair the Black community requires the Black community to have a very different economic situation from the one that we currently have.
Okay.
And we do not have the capacity autonomously or separately to change our economic conditions significantly without an infusion of resources that would be associated with a reparations project. The level of resources that exist in the Black community today are simply not up to snuff in terms of giving us the opportunity to really exercise the kinds of capabilities that we deserve to be able to exercise. And let me give you one illustration which concerns the nature of Black banking, because people frequently talk about buying Black, banking Black, and that somehow those types of activities would really, really transform the conditions of the Black community. And I would argue that they won't transform the conditions of the Black community significantly, given the level of resources that currently are present in the Black community. And I want to give you a sense of how small those resources are with respect to the banking sector. Okay. If you looked at the top 5 Black-owned banks in the United States, they have approximately $2 billion in assets. Okay, the top 5. I think that the top Black-owned bank, which was a consequence recently of a merger of 2 others, has about $1 billion in total assets. Okay. J.P. Morgan Chase alone has $2.7 trillion in assets. And you have to go down the list of the top white-owned banks till you get to about maybe number 260 before you start talking about a single white-owned bank that has the equivalent amount of assets as the top 5 Black-owned banks. So if you're talking about relying on the resources that exist in the Black community in the present moment to give us equality, it's not going to happen.
Hold on, Dr. Darity. Hold on one sec. Woo! Because Doc, that's what that was a discussion that and actually that question came from Brother Geechee Ya. We were talking about that on Facebook yesterday. There was a brother that put up a post and he said, can you imagine if instead of Black people standing in line to vote, if we stood in line he said, if we stood in line to support a Black-owned business, he said our economic problems would disappear overnight. And
I
Dr.
wish it
Darity,
was true, but it's not. It's a fantasy.
and so Brother Geechee Ya, he came on the post and he said, I understand the sentiments, of the post and what the brother's trying to say. But he said, I think, Dr. Maat, you need to ask Dr. Darity about that. If we just started supporting Black-owned businesses, would all of our economic problems just disappear if we just practice group economics? And clearly, Doc, you're saying, no, that's not it. We're relying on the resources that we have
I'm all
now.
in favor of practicing group economics, but I think
Absolutely.
that if we want it to be really effective, we have to start with a different base in terms of our fundamental resources.
Absolutely. Let me say, okay, absolutely. And so I do want to announce some winners. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 winners at this point. So we have Brother Geechee Ya. Brother Geechee Ya, please be sure, sir, to inbox me a mailing address. Brother Kwame Apaya, please inbox me, sir, a mailing address. Brother Tawolo Johnson, please inbox me your mailing address. Shadi Wap, I don't know if that's male or female, I don't know. Okay, but send me your shipping address. Brother Curtis Chambers, please send me inbox me your mailing address, shipping address. Sister Janet, and I was so happy when a sister got in here. Sister Janet Belton, sis, please inbox me your mailing address so I can get a book to you. And Brother Quasi Ponza, brother, please send me your shipping address so I can get this book out to you. So family, at this point, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I have 7 books, and I see Sister Melissa said, done, Doc, good looking out. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and check you out, sister, while Dr. Darity is answering a few questions, guys. So I'm gonna open up the floor for a few questions. I do see some questions in the chat. Okay. I do see some questions in the chat. And so I'm going to scroll up and ask. And you guys had some really good questions, by the way. Really good questions. And I hope that it's going to allow me to go back to look at it. Some of these questions. Omega Sunlight asked, do you think the society that would collapse the dollar as soon as the reparations were to go in motion? So I don't understand. Do you think that society would collapse the dollar, or like basically that they would do away with the dollar as soon as the reparations were to go in motion? So I think that's what Omega is trying to articulate. Mm-hmm.
That's a good question. One of the things that we emphasize in our book is that a critical dimension of how you would structure a reparations plan is to design it in such a way that you minimize the risk of inflation. That's a real danger, that you could set up a reparations plan and people's spending could occur in a setting in which there wasn't any comparable increase in production, and you would just raise prices and make the money worthless or worth less than it was. And so we talk about this in the book, that we need to make sure that we design the reparations plan in such a way that we minimize the likelihood that there would be high inflation, and we make sure that it's designed in such a way that we preserve the purchasing power of the dollar to the greatest extent possible.
Okay.
That's a very good question. Yeah.
All right. And so Brother Quasi and Ponza asks, he said, speaking of you, Dr. Darity, why does Dr. Darity believe in the idea of equality when white folk are poor and unemployed too?
Well, I believe in equality with respect to the amount of wealth, and it is not the Black community's fault that there's a highly unequal distribution of wealth in the white community. Okay? It's not our responsibility. I'm concerned about eliminating the entire racial wealth differential, which includes wealth that is held by whites at the upper end of the wealth distribution. In fact, and this is a really stunning statistic, 97% of all white held wealth is held by white households that are above the middle white household. 97%. And this is not just because of a handful of white billionaires who have a lot of money, although there are a handful of white billionaires who have a lot of money, but 25% of white households have a net worth in excess of $1 million. It's only 4% of Black households. And whites at the lowest end of the income distribution, the poorest whites, have a level of wealth that is approximately the same as all Black Americans. So when we're talking about poor whites do not look the same as poor Blacks. In fact, poor whites sometimes look better than Blacks who are in the middle of the Black income distribution. So I'm not particularly worried about poor whites. I mean, there's another set of policies that I've been an advocate of, what I call an economic bill of rights for the 21st century, which is for all Americans. But the specific issue of the racial wealth gap in the United States is something that has to be addressed with policies that are specifically targeted for Black Americans to eliminate the Black-white wealth differential.
Thank you so much, Dr. Darity. Brother Tawolo Johnson asks, he says, Dr. Darity, could you speak on the false information that states that wealth created from slavery no longer exists today? Some American whites believe they don't benefit from American slavery today at all.
Yeah, I mean, one of the critical areas of discussion in our book, and it's not unique to our book because we rely on research that lots of other people have done, but one of the critical areas in the book is the discussion of the basic and fundamental role that Black American enslavement played in the development of this nation, both North and South. One of the critical examples of this is the role of the cotton sector, which was not confined to the South by any means. I mean, it was critical for the development of the textile industry in the North. It was critical for the development of the financial sector in New York City, which now constitutes Wall Street. So people need to do an analysis of the historical basis for the economic conditions that exist today. And there's a passage, let me see if I can find it quickly, that I'd like to share from our book. It's not very long, but it speaks to this point. We say, all those persons who subsequently migrated to the United States have moved to a country whose contemporary promise of opportunity is anchored in its history of exploitation of Black lives. The slave trade and slavery extended their tendrils into every fissure of the American economy, producing a hothouse effect that created vast national wealth. America's economic success was built by the unrelenting enslavement of Black people. One can hypothesize a counterfactual chain of events where American economic growth took place without slavery, but this is the actual way in which it all began.
Doc, this is my read next week. I'm reading right now Mind Control by Baba Kidi Awadu. I'm reading that right now. And so I'm halfway through his book. I'm reading this next week. This is
Great.
the book I'm reading next week. And just you reading the passage from it just made me want to read it. I'm excited to read it more. It's making me want to read it more and more. Thank you so much for that. Kwame Apaya said, please ask Dr. Darity, is that the reason they won't give us reparations because of the reasons he just explained? So earlier in the show, you were talking about how reparations would empower us, essentially. It would empower us economically and politically, and we would be able to participate, in this system the way we would want to, on equal footing, on equal plane. And so he's saying, well, look, is this the reason why they won't give us reparations, or why they're slow to giving it to us? Because they don't want us to be able to, I guess, participate on an equal footing, or what, that's the question, Doc.
Well, I certainly think that that's relevant to the attitudes of a significant number of white Americans. I don't know that that explains why there's some resistance among, say, 30% of Black Americans to reparations, but I certainly think that the issue that's raised now is relevant to opposition among white Americans. I will say this, though, there is a basis for some optimism. In the year 2000, Michael Dawson and Ravana Popoff, two Black scholars at the University of Chicago, did a survey of American attitudes towards reparations. And they found at that time that 4% of white Americans were in favor of reparations for Black Americans. By 2018, that percentage had risen to about 15%, still somewhat low, but considerably higher than 4%. And in the aftermath of the coronavirus crisis and the visibility that was given to the murder of George Floyd, it seems now that the most recent surveys suggest that about 30% of white Americans are willing to endorse reparations for Black Americans. Now, whether or not we've got a permanent change in attitude or it's only a temporary effect of the current crisis, I can't say. But the direction of change in terms of opinion, particularly among white Americans, is promising. I can't assure that anyone that reparations is really going to happen in any quick moment in time, but it strikes me that there has been a change in public attitude, and it's been a change for the better.
Okay. Thank you for that, Doc. And I have two more questions, Doc, and then family, we have to shut it down. All right. We gotta shut it down. All right. And I do see African science. You put done, you typed done in the comments section, but I'm looking on Facebook for a tag from you showing that you did share the video. I don't see it. And Brother Justin Maurice, your Facebook page is private. And so if you could shoot me an inbox message and say something so that and make the post public so that I can confirm that you shared it. Sister Melissa, I do see that you shared it. So sister, please send me a shipping or mailing address. Okay. And so at this point, I have 2 books left. And I see Brother Frank, you said that you shared it. And I'm on your page now, and I don't see the video. The last post I see from you is November. Well, it says 4 days ago. All right, Mr. Frank Toltien. All right, sir. So you guys have to, Mr. Nook. Mr. Nook, you got to share it, sir. All right. So the last question, Brother Geechee, I wanted you to talk about prioritizing economics before politics, in a sense. So getting our acquiring economic power before we go after political power. Dr. Amos Wilson, in his book Blueprint for Black Power, he talked about that. He said, get the economic power, and then you'll be able to get the political power, in a sense. So he talks about that in his book. But you have some people saying that we should be seeking political power before economic power. What are your thoughts about that, Dr. Darity?
Well, just in the same way that I think we should try to pursue group economics under the current circumstances, we also have to be engaged in the political process to the extent possible.
Okay.
But we would be much more effective at both if we had the types of resources that would be associated with reparations. So I'm not suggesting that people should wait until reparations takes place to be involved in the political process. But what I am saying is our capacity to be effective in the political process would be far greater if we had the resources that are associated with a reparations plan.
Okay. Okay. Thank you so much for that, Doc. And I believe my last question, I thought I just saw it, Doc. Let me scroll up. And I think it was a question by African Science. African Science, okay. Will reparations have a negative effect on U.S. economy? Okay, so African Science asks, would reparations have a negative effect on U.S. economy? Dr. Darity.
I don't see how it would. I don't necessarily make the claim that it would have a beneficial effect on the economy. It might, but I don't see any reason why it would have a negative effect on the U.S. economy, particularly if it was designed in such a way that we reduce the likelihood that there would be an inflationary effect from the reparations plan.
Okay. Okay. Thank you so much for that, Dr. Darity. Thank you so much for that, Dr. Darity. And let me give it up for you, Dr. Darity. I got to drop a fire for you one more time, Doc, for coming on the platform and dropping all of this good information.
I love it. That's the first time I've ever gotten fires in my life.
So, Doc, thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate, your time, and I look forward to the discussion with your co-author. I'm looking forward to that, and so I'll be in touch with you to get her email address, your email information from you to bring her on the platform, so we could really comb through the book. But Doc, you were wonderful. You answered all of our questions, and you disseminated a lot of good information, powerful information. The people in the chat room, they're saying thank you. They're saying they loved it. I don't know if you can see the chat from your end, but they're looking, and they have so many. You can't see it. Let me share my screen with you and see if you can. Because you're saying you can't see the comments. So what I'm gonna do is share my screen so you can see what they're saying about you, Doc. So if you pay attention on this side where you see my cursor, you see the fires, Doc. Dr. Darcy, let me get my glasses on. So yeah, so they're giving you the
nice. Thank you all. Yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
they said
very nice.
They said so much great information. They said we love you, brother Justin Maurice said we love you, Dr. Darity. Sister Janet Bolton, so much great information. Sister Carlene Jr., she put the fires up. Kichi Ya said, you killed this, Dr. Maat. Great work. Queen Mother Althea says, peace and African Black power. Tawolo Johnson, brother Tawolo Johnson. So you can see all of these, Doc. I mean, they've been commenting the entire time we've been discussing. They've been commenting. So I just wanted you to see it with your own eyes, that they enjoyed the broadcast, Doc. And they said they're looking forward to hearing, more information from you, and also for reading your book. And someone in the chat asked also, before you go, the best way to get this book. Can we get this in Black-owned bookstores? So for example, I live in Baltimore. There's a Black-owned bookstore called Everyone's Place, which was established by Baba Nati and Mama Tabia. And so do they have this book? Because I would prefer for them to get it from a Black-owned bookstore. But I mean, I know it's on Amazon, but
so I happen to know that the Black-owned bookstores in Philadelphia have it. I'm less certain about Baltimore, but I suspect they wouldn't have much trouble getting it in if people ask for it.
Okay, and you know what? And I'll make
they can get it from our publisher ultimately.
Okay,
University of North Carolina Press. Yeah,
absolutely. And so what I'll do, and you sent me the publisher's information, and so I'm gonna make my bulk purchase on Monday, and with them, and then get these books out to the people who won tonight. All right. So thank you so much again, Dr. Darity, for coming on. I see Sister, I think your name is Mika. I want to say Sister Mika, because I had to select two more winners. Oh, Sister Tamika won. Sister Tamika won. Please tag me, Queen. All right. Tag me on Facebook so I can see that you shared the video. All right. So I'm going to write my Facebook information here. You tag two places, Dr. Deanna Bailey or Dr. Oya Adwa-Maat. All right, you could tag two places. Tag me, sis, so that I can get this book to you. All right, be sure to tag me. All right, and then also Lynn. I do see Lynn Dreamchild, you did tag me. And so I'm going to go and check and see what you did. All right. And if you tag me, then you have a book. Sister Tamika, I'm waiting on you. Family, join me back here next week. I have Baba Mku. Baba Mku is coming on to talk about the importance of critical thought. The importance of critical thought in his new book, Raising Awareness. So again, Dr. Darity, thank you so much for coming on. Family, thank you so much for joining. Peace and Black Power.
Let's combat and fight back with maltraction. The war of the minds, they want control of the masses. And Common Core, they dumb us down in the classes. Without knowledge, we can't gain access. Build with the elders, take notes and write classes. We keep whining on the block, how it's gonna stop? Let's start supporting our own, make their supply drop. We buy stocks, then we buy blocks. Cause we know the truth and we tuned in to Dr. Maat.